All right, everybody, thank you so much. You are tuning in with Thom, and I have an extremely special guest today, a guy who's going to be coming to the Buffalo area tomorrow and is up in Toronto today, but the legendary guitarist, and I guess I would like to call you a coattail inductee to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame
Yeah, okay.
through Genesis,
Fair
Mr. Daryl
enough. Yeah,
Stuermer.
yeah. It's great to be here. Sure.
I guess we'll start out with the obvious question, which is: did you ever, in a million years? I know you toured with Phil a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, but did you ever, in a million years, think that Genesis would be playing again as a group, and you'd be there?
No, I really didn't. I thought 2007 was our last tour, and I was prepared for that. And I mean, I always wanted to go on from there, of course. In fact, I thought it would have been nice for that to be even a longer tour, like maybe play South America, Japan, and Australia, but we never did. So I felt it was a little incomplete, but thought that was the end. But I mean, I knew that Phil was talking about doing some more. We did, well, we almost did not quite 3 years, but we were supposed to go out on tour with Phil for maybe a year at the most, and it just kept adding on more dates, and which was fantastic because we ended up doing South America, we did Australia, we did all of Europe, we did the United States. So no, it was a great tour too, and I think that really was what spurred this on. When Mike and Tony came to the Royal Albert Hall in London, they saw the band, they saw that Phil was singing well, they saw Nic, the drummer, and thought maybe we could do this. I think if they wouldn't have come to that show, that would have never happened. This would have never happened.
Well, that's incredible, and it leads me to the next question: is, you were working with Chester Thompson in Genesis beforehand, and the relationship between, I know you play bass and you play guitar, as most people probably know, and the relationship between the bass player and the drummer is crucial. And I'm curious about how that relationship has developed with you and Nic, and also maybe Nic's approach to the Genesis material versus the Phil Collins solo material, which are very different.
Absolutely. Phil's thing is, it sort of generally is more of a pop and R&B kind of vein, with some progressive rock. But the Genesis stuff, as you know, is much heavier, much more progressive rock kind of moments in it. And I think, in fact, this is more where Nic lives. I mean, musically. He came into our rehearsal. Now, Nic when he did our rehearsal for Genesis, he was 19. He's now 20. But when we started rehearsing, which seems like a long time ago, because we were supposed to do this in 2020, being a 19-year-old, do you know Phil Collins was 19 when he joined Genesis? So he's the same age as Nic. Yeah. And, now he's 70. So, but he's handed the baton over to his son. But so I think Nic plays this music even better. And he blew Mike and Tony away. He came to rehearsal he was so engaged. He came so prepared. I mean, I'm the type that does that too. I come into rehearsal. If the songs didn't change, I could probably do the show the next day. That's the way Nic was. So I thought, wow, this kid is just unbelievable. And even with those 2.5 to 3 years that he did the Phil Collins tour, he just elevated his playing even more so. It's funny because, I think what he's done in 3 years, somebody would take 15 years to do. But he's playing around with, veteran musicians. He's playing with people like Phil's band, like Leland Sklar and Brad Colin and myself. And I think that helps him, of course, to be around people that have been doing this a long time. So he's just a sponge, just soaking up all this. And the thing what's really great about him is he's not only a great musician, he's a great person. He doesn't have a big ego. He has confidence without the ego. And I think that's a really interesting thing. And he has no problem asking questions, like he wants to learn something. But I look at him now and I'm thinking, he's already there. He's just unbelievable. Such a great drummer, and so we're real happy to have him, of course. And Chester is fantastic too. I just think that time was done. And they moved on to having Nic, and it's been a very important. It's been an important change. I think people, when they see us live, they're blown away by Nic's drumming.
Does he sing by any chance? I mean, obviously we know that Phil started out behind the kit and then was a singer as well. I mean, I don't know that I've read or heard of Nic being a singer, but maybe you've heard something.
I don't, he has a band. It's funny, I can't tell you the name of the band. I don't remember, but he has a band of guys that are more like around his age. And I know that he sings backing vocals from behind the kit, but I don't think he sings lead. I don't think he has that, but that's what he does when he's not doing this.
Wouldn't it be crazy if it came full circle and one day he wound up fronting a Genesis band or something like that as a lead vocalist, just like Phil did, because Phil's story is just so fascinating.
It is, and I think Genesis worked with Phil as a singer because Phil came from within the band. I think that was a very important thing, because when Peter left, then you think they apparently auditioned quite a few people, and nothing really worked out. And then Phil thought, let me give this a shot. They were recording an album, A Trick of the Tail. They were recording this album, not even having a singer yet. And then Phil just said, let me try. And the first song he sang was Squonk, which is one of the hardest songs to sing. And this is the story I've been told. So, and from that point on, he became the singer. They tried to do a Genesis without Phil. They used Ray Wilson. It just didn't work out. It's not the same thing when you bring in someone from the outside to be the lead, to be the front man. So, and Phil is such an entertainer. Even now when he's sitting in the chair, he's still very entertaining, and people just love him. So.
Well, let's. I got some records here, as you mentioned. It's if we could chat about them. I may or may not be correct. Is this the first Genesis recording that you appeared on?
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. What do you remember about this record? I know it's interesting. They did the 3 sides, which were the live tracks, and I think the UK version, there was a 4th live track that was with a lineup previous to you, but. Right. There's some great stuff on here. Do you remember the recording of it, first time you heard it, and some impressions?
No, because everything that I did was live, and I don't even remember where that was taken. Like what shows did they take the live recording from? Because like what we do now, every night is recorded. So when Genesis put out a live recording in 2000, after the 2007 tour, they were from various shows. They were from maybe 6 to 9 to 10. I don't even know, to be honest with you. But in this particular album, I'm not sure where that recording was. I don't know if it's anywhere on the album where the live stuff is.
Let's take a look.
Yeah, I have no idea.
You don't remember that? You don't remember that night?
Oh, well, I remember that night because it's like every night, right?
It says, just says during the Genesis 1981 tour. It's interesting. They don't even mention the where it was recorded. That's incredible.
I'm assuming it's recorded. Most of them are probably Europe, and they recorded so many nights. I think they probably didn't want to put. Whereas the Live Over Europe one, which is a 2007 tour, they told you where that recording was from: Manchester, England, or London, or Germany, Stuttgart, Germany. That I don't know. I can't tell you because I don't remember, but I remember that show, that particular tour. I remember very much how that was, and I remember the guitar I was playing, and which I don't have anymore, but someone else does, and they put it on Facebook, and they show the guitar that they got from me. Somehow I don't know how they ended up with it. I sold it, and somebody sold it to them.
Yeah, it's a great record. I love listening to this. I'm a vinyl record collector, as you're probably guessing by now. Do you remember this guy?
Oh my God. Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, that was my first solo album ever. And one of the songs in there is called I Don't Want to Know. If you know that song is also on Phil's No Jacket Required, because I did it as an instrumental first, and I played the demo, not that recording. I played the demo to Phil one time when he was, I was over in England, and we were doing demos for his album, No Jacket Required. And I said, I just want to play you this. I wasn't assuming or thinking that he's going to do anything with it. I just wanted him to hear it. And he liked this. And on the cassette that I had, it was called F Song. It's in the key of F. I had no title. And I played it for him, and he said to me, I like this. He says, would you mind if I wrote lyrics to it? And I thought to myself, yeah, don't touch my song, you know. And I thought, sure, go ahead, see what you can do. And then ended up on the album called I Don't Want to Know. And it's on my instrumental version is on my solo album.
And you have a pretty, I mean, you've put out a lot of solo stuff, a lot of great solo work. I mean, obviously this one, you said it's got to have some affection because it was the very first one. And you know, I love listening to this record. I really do.
Oh, thank you. It's actually, honestly, it's my favorite because it seems like it's my first child.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I have two daughters, and you know, you love them both equally, but there's something about your first anything is, you know, your first girlfriend, your first child, whatever, your first album. There's always something there special.
So I think we've touched on your first record with Genesis that was put out, which was Three Sides Live, your first solo album. I think this is the first Genesis album you actually ever heard. Is that correct?
That's one. Yeah. In fact, when I was working with Luc-Ponty, he actually gave me a cassette, and he said, "Oh, you should hear this band. This is a great band." On one side of the cassette was A Trick of the Tail. It didn't fit on the cassette because it's a longer. Cassettes were only 40 minutes or whatever they were, and that album's longer than that. But and on side B of this cassette was Wind and Wuthering.
Oh, wow.
So my first two albums I ever heard by them was that. Now, it doesn't mean I didn't hear Peter Gabriel with them. I just never had any records by them, and I didn't know that I was hearing them when someone would play something on their record player. But this was my first introduction to Genesis, and it was handed to me by Luc-Ponty, who was somebody that I really admired, and I was working with for 3 years, 1975 through 77. And I immediately loved this band, and I thought, that's Genesis? Oh, this is what everybody's talking about? Because the only time I ever saw or heard Genesis that I knew of, I was watching a television show, a PBS television show, and there was an interviewer named Chip Monk. That was his name. He's Canadian.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I believe he's Canadian. And he had 4 musicians on it. And he had Mike Love, John McLaughlin, jazz sax player Charles Lloyd, and Peter Gabriel. And so I wasn't watching it for Peter Gabriel because I didn't know who he was. I was watching because I was a big fan of John McLaughlin. And I was kind of a jazzer, especially around this time. And they played a clip from a Genesis show, and it's a little area of a song. It's another song called Willow Farm and Supper's Ready, which is like their big long. So, and this was only like a little moment, maybe not even a minute long. And Peter was wearing the flower on his head. So as an instrumentalist and a jazzer, I thought, what is this? It looked ridiculous to me. And that wasn't like one of their greatest moments. If they would have played like Los Endos or something like that, I would have thought, who is this band? So I didn't have any reason to become a fan of them at that moment. And so that's why when I heard Trick of the Tail, I thought, that's Genesis? Oh my God, these guys are incredible. I love the sound. I love how epic some of their songs got. I mean, they lovely ballads. And I mean, they were just great. So I became an instant fan.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned the costumes because I was when I was doing some interview prep, I was watching this interview with Chester Thompson. He said you guys met in the airport on the way to the first Genesis audition, and one of you asked the other, "Do you think we're gonna have to wear costumes on stage?"
I remember meeting Chester. In fact, I was out with John Luc-Ponty. It was at O'Hare Field in Chicago, and there's Chester, and he was on tour with a thing called The Wiz, which was a musical, and I said, "Hey, Chester," because I had met him before. And I said, what you going to be doing? And he said, "I'm going to be working with Genesis." And I'm thinking, flower on the head, Peter Gabriel. That's all I knew about them at that moment. And I thought, if Chester's joining Genesis, they must be pretty good, you know, because he was an incredible drummer. So that's what, then almost probably around the same time, that's when John Luc-Ponty played me that cassette. And that's when I became a fan.
What was it? Do you remember the first song that you did at the audition?
Yeah, it was with my audition, by the way, was just with Mike. They had apparently auditioned quite a few guitar players in England, and then they had someone they wanted, so they came to America and they had a list of 5 people, and I was on that list. I'm somebody else that auditioned, a bass player, a great bass player named Alfonso Johnson. He was
Oh
with
yeah.
Weatherly, and I knew him. And they wanted a guitarist that could play bass. He was more of a bass player that could play some guitar. So they already had, had Steve Hackett. So it wasn't going to be easy guitar parts. I mean, you have to be, some able to play that kind of music. And this guy can play anything on bass. He's an incredible bass player, but his guitar playing is probably very second to bass playing. So he auditioned and didn't get the thing, but he recommended me. And so I got on this list. And so I remember they sent me a cassette. This was, by the way, in December of 1977. And they sent me a cassette and had 5 songs on it. And 3 were older songs like Squonk, Los Endos, and there was something else. But the 2 new songs were called Calypso and 5/8. Those weren't real titles. Those were working titles. Calypso was Follow You, Follow Me. 5/8, and yeah, from their newest album called, and then there were 3. And 5/8 was a song that's called Down and Out. And so I learned all those songs. I remember going into my bedroom and just practicing these and learning these songs. So when I came to audition, I wasn't sure if the whole band was going to be there. I don't remember if the manager told me it's not going to be the whole band. It might be just Mike Rutherford. And I didn't really know who Mike Rutherford was either. And so I went to that audition in New York. They put me up at the Plaza Hotel, and I was the first of the 5 apparently to audition. And I remember sitting down with Mike and getting along personally right away. We just had a monitor system, and a pedal board was sitting down on the floor for the guitar sounds. And Mike gave me a guitar to play, and Mike had a guitar in his hands. And he says, "Let's first do this." And he has a cassette player and ran the cassette through the monitor system. And I just played along, and the first song was Squonk. And I started playing that. And then we didn't even get through the whole song, and he stops the cassette and he fast forward. He said, "Let's try something else." And then we did, I think, Down and Out or something. I think we ended up with Los Endos, which is, I'm sorry, Dance on a Volcano. Really interesting song. And I remember after doing 4 songs of the 5, he stopped the cassette and he said, this is an exact quote. He says, "Well, I think you're the one."
Oh, wow.
And I was amazed by that. He says, "What I'll do is I'll ring you at the Plaza Hotel tonight at 5 p.m. and we'll run through the songs for you to learn for the tour." And the tour was coming up in February, and this was December. They didn't even have a lead guitarist yet. And they got a tour all planned. And so I went back to my hotel, and he did ring me up, but it was more like 6 o'clock. I thought maybe I didn't get it because it was an hour late. And they auditioned 4 other people. So that's how it all began.
It's interesting. Trivia wise, Phil's very first North American tour or North American show as a lead singer, because I think the first show was in Canada, was at Buffalo. Yeah.
Oh, really?
So I mean, you have to remind Phil that when he's in town tomorrow. But do you remember the first tour or first show you did and what the venue was?
I remember that it was in Pennsylvania. I don't remember the city it was. It wasn't Allentown. It was, I can't remember that. I have a pretty good memory on most things, but for some reason that one, I just know the state I was in, I believe. So, but I remember the feeling of it is when I walked out and I couldn't believe. I was used to playing to audiences of about maybe 1,200 to 2,500 with Jean Luc-Ponty, which was a nice theater size. But to come out there in an arena and have these people whistling and screaming while you're walking up on stage was almost, I remember almost shaking because it was like the energy was so intense. And when we started that first song, it was like, holy crap. The people just went crazy with that, It was amazing. It was an amazing feeling.
What are the crowds like now? I mean, I imagine obviously everybody's older. A lot of your fans are older, and things are a little bit different now. But it's still got to be pretty exciting. I saw the Phil Solo show with you, and man, people were just so stoked to hear that music again. I imagine with Genesis, there's even more sentiment too, because was around a lot longer than even Phil.
Oh yeah, yeah. In fact, we've actually talked about that with the guys. I mean, we talk about it almost every night about what the audience is, and um, in fact, our audience that we played in Montreal was probably the most vocal audience. But we're noticing that when we used to come to the U.S. after playing Europe, U.S. was almost I'm talking about the '80s and yeah, mainly the '80s when we were playing here. The audiences were almost so noisy and loud. Like when you'd be playing a ballad, they'd be talking over it or going out and getting beer. But now it's different. It's because they're older, they're more respectful, but they're very enthusiastic, but they calm down when they're supposed to. Like if you're playing a ballad, they listen to the ballad. They're not running around all over the place. And what's really an interesting too is that people are wearing masks a lot. And especially like up in here in Canada, it's mandatory that when you're even watching our show, we're wearing your mask. So on one hand, that might mask in a sense the sound that they're yelling, but they were very vocal. They're singing along with songs. I've noticed people have tears in their eyes a lot of times. Oh. I think they're looking like this is probably the last time they'll see Genesis, and it probably is. But the audience is older. But at the same time, I'm looking out there and I see a lot of 30-year-olds, which is amazing to me. I'm sure they were raised with their parents listening to it, and they think it's banned because it's a retro thing, classic rock, classic progressive rock. And the reaction is fantastic. I think it's better now because they're not like annoyingly loud. They're just really enthusiastic. Now, the other thing is we wear monitors. So crowds are not as loud as they used to be to us because we're not hearing them as much. We can hear them. But before it was like, oh my, you'd go out there and almost your ears would distort. They were so loud and whistling. And now we have in-ears that we're hearing each other really well. And it keeps the stage level volume down. So it sounds better out there. But crowds have been great. And we did the UK. We did a few weeks in the UK. We got canceled. We had to postpone the last week because of a few people getting COVID, but we're going to make those up anyway, so that should be good.
All right, so you're up in Canada. I got one more record I want to kind of throw at you because I know there's an interesting story behind this, and I'm wondering if we can tell it because in Western New York, this guy's pretty famous, Mr. Kim Mitchell, but you have a connection to Kim Mitchell and Max Webster. And I wondered, especially with you being up in Toronto, I wonder if Kim made the time to come out and see you guys while you're in town. And also if you could kind of relate that Max Webster and Daryl Stuermer connection, which I don't think a lot of people know about.
Yeah. It's funny because he's coming to our show tonight.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Mike Tilka, who used to play bass with Max Webster, the original Max Webster, is coming, and Kim Mitchell is coming, and another friend of mine plays guitar. They all know each other, named Sam. And so, and Sam plays with a band called Elton Ron. Yeah, Elton John, Elton Ron. Anyway, It's a tribute band to Elton John. The story is this. My brother's a bass player, I'm a guitar player. And Mike Tilka, the original bass player, was in Milwaukee at one point when we were playing in a band together. And Mike was going to go back home because home was Windsor, Canada. And he wanted to find out if we'd like to start a band together because we were kind of tired of the band that we were in. So we thought, sure, let's go up to Canada. We went up to Canada and we started rehearsing in this house with a drummer named Phil. And we had a sax player named Bob Bunzik, and we had a keyboard player too. And we started rehearsing and we weren't making any money. But at one point we thought, what do we name the band? And I had written 2 songs, instrumentals. One was called Family at Max, and the other song was called Song for Webster. And Mike Tilka said, why don't we call the band Max Webster? And I thought that was an interesting name. You would think maybe it's a person, but like Jethro Tull is not a person in the band. So that's how that all began. And I don't think we ended up playing any gigs. We were starving up there. And I remember I was eating Harvey's hamburgers every day because that's all we had money for. And that's a chain up there, I guess. And so my brother and I ended up going home, and Mike Tilka kind of went on, and they got a guitar player named Kim Mitchell, and they became a success. So thank God we left so they could be successful. I ended up doing other things, and then I'm here now. So they were a great band, and Mike was their original bass player, and I think he managed them for a while. He's obviously not with them. And Mike started a sound company up in Toronto called Whispery's Sound, and he's retired from that now. And I just had dinner with him a few nights ago here when we just arrived. We had a night off, so I had Mike took and I got them 3 tickets for the show, and it's Kim Mitchell and my friend Sam and Mike Tilka.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I mean, I assume you've met Kim in the past too. He's an amazing musician.
Yeah, amazing musician, and I think he's a DJ. And in fact, this is a funny thing. In 2007, we were coming in to hear the play, and Mike took us, "Hey, listen, I got you an interview on Kim Mitchell's show."
Oh, wow.
Just so when you get there, we'll go down there, and sometimes they have a guitar player come in and you'll play together and blah, blah, blah. So I get to the hotel and I call Mike. I say, "I'm here." And he says, "You'll never guess what happened. All the power went down at the station that he's working with." Oh, so wow. It never happened. We never did the interview. We never did that. But he is going to come with Mike tonight.
That's awesome. Well, that's great to hear. I'm a huge Kim Mitchell fan. So I've interviewed Kim before. He's a great interview like you. One last thing that we'll wrap up. And, it's funny. I mentioned that I actually was able to interview Luc-Ponty, and he spoke very highly of you. And, of course, there's another guy who spoke very highly of you, and his name's Steve Hackett. And Steve told me a story about how you guys met at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, I believe. And he says he had just wonderful things to say about you. And I think it's fascinating how, a lot of times people think that one guy takes over for another one and there's some kind of rivalry, but he said he had wonderful things. Have you ever seen Steve perform any of the Genesis stuff? Because his shows are incredible.
Well, a long, long time ago, he was playing in an actual club in my hometown, Milwaukee. I saw him there. That's the only time I saw him. And I can't remember that. God, that was probably 20 years ago. But I mean, I see a lot of his things on YouTube. Like I even said, I was telling him about certain songs I liked on his records. I mean, these weren't, it was a couple of Genesis songs. And no, him and I get a lot. What's funny, a lot of people, like you said, want to make it like there's rivalry. And, I've never had a bad thought about Steve. In fact, because I had to learn so much of his stuff in the beginning, I became a fan of the guy. I thought, how do you do this? Because he knew how to use different pedal effects and things, and I had nothing. I maybe had a wah-wah. It was the only pedal that when I was working with Luc-Ponty, it wasn't a band that used different sounds. So I admired him immediately. And sometimes I thought, how did he come up with that? It sounded like a violin, or it sounded like a keyboard. No, I mean, he's a great player. And so for me to learn his stuff and step in his shoes, it's a tough position because people like to compete and say, "Oh, Steve is a way better guitar player than Daryl." And somebody will say, they get into these blog arguments, and some people say, "Well, I like both of them," and some, "Well, I think Daryl does this," but that doesn't matter to me. That they're having these fights, but it seems ridiculous to me, because if you're saying that they're unhappy that I'm in the band or I'm touring with them, that wasn't my decision. That was Mike, Tony, and Phil's decision. So they're questioning their ability. And I think I've done fine with Genesis, and I've been with them over 40 years now, and don't have a bad thought about these guys, because if I did, I wouldn't be there. There's a certain point when it's not about the money and fame. It's just like, I'm having a great time. But every time I work with them, it's like our families get back together. Like I haven't been with Genesis for 14 years now. The last tour is in 2007. I believe that's about 14 years. it feels like 14 months to me.
Wow.
It doesn't feel like 14. And it was 14 years prior to that. It was 1992 to 2007. And I remember sitting down with Mike at our first rehearsal before we went to rehearsal, and we were just sitting there talking. And I thought, it hasn't been 14 years. It feels like it's been 14 months. Same thing. So, and like we were talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it was great to sit down with Steve and talk, and because you read what other people say about us. It has nothing to do with what we really have as far as my affection for his guitar playing and him as a human being. And, he's a great guy, and, I have nothing bad to say about him. In fact, it's only good things because he's a great guitar player. He influenced me with the Genesis music. And that's amazing to me that people would even think there's any kind of competition, but I understand.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, even well before the internet, controversy kind of sells. But the thing he said to me that always stuck with me, he says, the thing he admired about you is that you didn't just ape his guitar parts, but you respected them. He said that you were able to take his material and play it in a way that respected the original arrangements, but you weren't just a copycat guy. And I think that's a high compliment from a guy like Steve Hackett, and well deserved, by the way. I think that you both bring a lot to the table.
Well, thank you. And, and you do have to respect certain parts. Certain things have to be there, and other things don't. I mean, Mike never said to me, I want you to do exactly what Steve played. But without even saying it, I knew there's certain signature lines and certain things that Steve did. They have to be there. Even in a solo, those specific lines are cues, and they have to be there. And they were so creative. And so, so to me, they're strong. If it's that strong, I have to play it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, listen, Daryl, thank you so much. Hopefully you'll have a nice trip to Buffalo. As usual, they're calling for snow around this time of year. So, but I know you're Wisconsin, so this is nothing that's really going to scare you. And obviously you're in Toronto today, so I'm sure it's a little bit chilly up there. But anything you want to say to your fans and supporters over the years before we wrap up?
I just want to say thank you for being fans of band Genesis. I'm a fan of Genesis, so I'm just happy that people are still coming out and seeing our shows, and of all ages. That's what's amazing. They're all ages coming out.
Awesome. Well, fantastic. Well, let's hope this isn't really the last domino, but if it is, I'm sure we'll still be seeing plenty of Daryl Stuermer post Genesis as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to see you, Thom.
Yeah, great to see you as well. All right. Well, that's a wrap.